Let's come to the presentation today. And this is number 47 out of a year of 52. And we're pursuing an inquiry that is enormous and trying to acclimate ourselves to having movement in that enormity. And the time-honored way of doing this in a wisdom inquiry in such a vast field is to let certain themes occur in their drama and to look at the quality of person or persons involved with this particular dramatic dynamic, because it is the dynamic of space-time that is the time dimension. And for those who've been following this for a little while or even for a long while, time is energy. In the universe of space-time, time is energy. In the equation E equals mc squared, E is time. mc squared is space. And it is the mass of phenomenality in the dynamic of time that creates what we theoretically understand as space. So that space-time, as a formulaic description, is actually the viewpoint from the phenomenality, from the causality, from the universe, whereas time-space is the conscious rectification of that, putting time as the first dimension, not the fourth. However that is, and that turns out to be in a complementarity, time and space. And those four dimensions have a fifth dimension, which is consciousness. But consciousness is not a part of the universe, of space or time, but is that primordiality of source out of which space-time emerges. For time, its emergence as first dimension is spontaneous. There was no time, now there is. And instantly, space is blossomed out of time, which emerged spontaneously, so that it takes a very high Dharma consciousness to make a differential that is not causal for what we then characterize as space-time, but can come to recognize that it's actually time-space, because a differential consciousness is a high Dharma, not the Dharma of the way in which the cycle of nature has a relativity of space-time eventually, but that whole integral cycle, in fact, has an ability to be squared, mc squared, the speed of light squared. The speed of light squared is the calibration of electromagnetic energy in the universe, and mass is what is being propelled at below the speed of light in the universe. And should mass exceed the c, the speed of light, not only would the universe become infinite, but mass would shrink to zero. And this is the clue, the double paired, parallel, in tandem, symmetrical clue. The source of time is a zero dimension of nature. Yes, mass shrinks to zero. Truthfully, high truthfully. In differential consciousness, one can come to the vision, that fifth dimension, that quintessential dimension, the alchemy of nature. Nature is a zero field, but consciousness is an infinite field and has a get-together with the zero field of nature, and the zero field of nature is spontaneous for birthing because of fertility. It is the infinite fertility of zero field nature that generates not only what is and what can be and what will be and what was, but beyond belief, reality. One of the deepest qualities that we've been looking at, and last week we looked at a woman, a wise old woman who's still alive, Edith Turner. Her two latest books, Heart of Lightness, and I mentioned the film of The Unbearable Lightness of Being that was done a few years ago. And her book on Communitas, published in 2003 and 2007. And it is a tribute to the old wise woman to be a consistent teacher and guide in that bridging from the universe to the cosmos, from the zero field of nature in its cycle, which has not only a circularity of cycle, but has a squareability of frame. Something which I long ago began calling the square of attention. To sidestep, to pirouette, and not be in the word frame or framing, as in frame of reference. Because it is the frame of referentiality that gives identity and identification as bounds of causality and of structural meaning in symbols. It is important to recognize that they are important, they are significant. And frames, squares of attention, are in fact universally there, but they have a further aspect in their dimensionality of the integral of nature in its cycle, in its frame of reference. And that is that there's not only a momentum to the dynamic of time, but that time has a curling, spiraling quality around the arrow of time as space experiences it, as phenomenal actuality within space experiences time. It is not just that it is the arrow of time, but it is the magnetic spiraling around the line of dynamic of the development of the causality of phenomenality in the universe So that the magnetic complement of electromagnetism as a dynamic is the magnetic. And in the 21st century, we now understand very well and are having a whole new technology that it isn't just the polarity of the electron charge that gives us energy then for phenomenality to work within a space-time, but it is also the spin. The chirality of the magnetic spin. It can spin right-handed or left-handed. It is a double helical quality to the magnetic moment of electromagnetic energy, so that like there is electronics, there is now spintronics. Just as there are electron as particles, there are spin sparticles. And whole technologies, industries, researching now is developing in the early 21st century. A technology, a techne, the Greek word for art, a technology, a beautiful application of spin just as electron charge. What is interesting about spintronics is that it applies especially not only to the spin of the electron, but applies to the angular momentum of the proton as well. So that a further development in the 21st century is here within a possible far-reaching, a little bit beyond visioning, a differential consciousness which lacks that little extra quality, not of resolution, but of an alchemical solution that is further transformed. Because the solution that comes from differential consciousness, envisioning, we call it in science theory, theoria, a contemplative seeing into this extra-dimensional quality. The differential consciousness of vision needs to have an extra second transform in history. Not history as a discipline, as a subject, but history as a dimension. Just like vision is a fifth dimension, quintessential, transforming by fermenting nature into its fermented state, its inebriated state, its transformative state. Just as water is a universal solvent, alcohols are universal solvents as well. The universe takes organic alcohols, just like the inorganic universe takes water, to operate and to work perfectly well, to generate life out of phenomena. So that we need to understand that history as a seventh dimension phase become dimension. Symmetrically gives a parenthetical to a sixth dimensional, transformed by vision of a person who in their art of maturation has been able to carry the visionary energy, the theory, through themselves into a cosmic play. And in this cosmic play, comes the ability to have history as a kaleidoscopic consciousness, as a seventh dimension. And it is history as a seventh dimension of differential consciousness distilled out of its fermentation, distilled into a seventh dimension that allows for an eighth dimension science as a universe descriptive phase, for sure, an eighth dimension, for sure, and related to the sixth dimension of the prismatic person, who takes like the light, as it were, metaphorically, the light of quintessential visioning and puts it through the prismatic person, and one gets the spectrum in the magnetic seventh dimension, which allows finally for a real analytic of science to occur, to be applied, to make, for instance, a spintronics out of an electronics, which in itself was revolutionary when it first came to light. When did electronics first come to light? With the discovery of electricity and its polarity and how it works. The person for that was Benjamin Franklin, flying his kite with his house key dangling from the kite in a rainstorm, with the lightning hitting the key dangled from the kite, and from a wire from the key coming into his den in his home, and being able to trap, to hold, to register, to store the electric energy of the lightning into a matrix of Leyden jars in a wooden box. There were about 12 of them. That was his 12 disciples, if you will, metaphorically. And to be able to then tap the stored lightning as electricity in that first battery and to be able to apply it. His first application of it, curiously enough, came about this time of the year. He used it to zap a turkey for his Thanksgiving meal. He wrote up all of his experiments and sent them to one person, the one person who could follow and understand patiently over the years that Franklin did this, Peter Collinson in London, who finally put them together and published them in London. And when they were published in 1751, it was like the gong ringing in the midst of the 18th century, 1751, that a whole new understanding of the universe had been achieved. The development of spintronics is very much on the level of the discovery of electricity and thereby the storage of it in batteries, etc., etc., and the application to eventually being an electromagnetic theory. James Clerk Maxwell in the 1870s in England. From an upper geography near Scotland of understanding that Franklin was really onto something, and therefore there must be a mathematic that could be developed to not only describe it, but to allow for an analytical development of it. We now, in the 47th presentation of the Parayana, the way across, the way beyond, the way across to the art of person, to the science of the universe raised to a cosmic level when the differential pair of consciousness and the kaleidoscopic pair of consciousness pair together not in a new square, a second square, but have a chirality where they move, as it can be diagrammed, 90 degrees left or right. It becomes a diamond of consciousness, a jewel. And when you put together in a complementarity the square and the diamond, you get the archetypal mandala, an 8-cornered, 8-pointed, 8-sided octagon, or that kind of jewel facet which can then be developed. One can have, in the realm of crystals, any number of facets as long as you know how to cut it along the planes that actually are there in its phenomenality. And so one can take a raw bit of carbon and have it cut so that it becomes a very, very important, valuable diamond. There are many other aspects. One of the aspects that we're getting into with Edith Turner and many other very wise old women who, in the 20th century especially, and on into the 21st century, have lived long lives of great wisdom. We're going to look today at some of the work of Marjorie Reeves, who passed away in 2003. She was 98 years old, and she is the person who developed the first really great understanding of apocalyptic spirituality, of the energy, of the dynamic of apocalyptic millennia. Pursuant to that, we need to understand something about the primordiality of human culture. Human culture, as Homo sapiens, had progressed for 150,000 years and received its first transformation, its fermentation, about 40,000 years ago, when art, just as in our era, science has begun to really emerge after some thousands of years. Art really emerged after some long thousands of years. And man, as Homo sapiens, wise man, became Homo sapiens sapiens, the square of wisdom, being wise about being wise. We are now transforming through a distillation to where Homo sapiens sapiens is becoming not only an advanced culture, but a culture that has been transformed into a civilization, and a civilization that is now distilling itself to be that at home in a whole star system, a stellar system. Homo sapiens stellaris, just now occurring, just now emerging enough so that the isolated persons as individuals, the isolated groups as sociological constructs, are beginning to have a recognition that there is a whole web linked by filaments of this web, and we can just graphically, ordinarily say that the mathematization of language into its zeros and ones, into its binary, brought together as bits, that those bits of a logical mathematical structure following life itself, and that when there are a pair of amino acids brought together, one gets a certain life registration, and that there are 4 of those amino acids brought together in 2 pairs to be 4, and you get the way in which a nucleic acid in its paired makes a quaternary, and those nucleic acids then are able to read out the mathematization of the structures of amino acids, making about 22, a set of 22 amino acids, out of which life can finally emerge making proteins. One of the ancient qualities of wisdom women in ancient culture, where Homo sapiens sapiens first emerged about 40,000 years ago, wise about being wise, is that they took the ritual comportment of survival and refined it through this fermentation into an art where the rituals of life, of following the way in which the animals and the plants work, of following the way in which those survival qualities were passed on, came to understand that there is a particular quality that had not been really mastered before, and that is the ritual crisis that comes up when there are new situations that occur in the sense of coming to haunt people, not just to occur in their dreams, but to occur in their lives. And that it isn't just that one is having a bad dream or bad dreams, but one's life has become bad. This crisis in culture was primordially understood by women. And one of the great developments of Edith Turner and her husband Victor Turner, their first assignment together as anthropologists was to go to Africa, to Zambia, to live among a tribe, the Ndembu. The first book published out of that was The Forest of Symbols, Ndembu ritual. Victor Turner put his name on it. Edith Turner was always understood that she was co-author. In a volume published in Chicago, not by the University of Chicago Press. Victor Turner was at the University of Chicago at the time. It's called The Ritual Process. And the Ritual Process subtitle is Structure and Anti-Structure. Not only structure and anti-structure in terms of electronics, but structure and anti-structure in terms of a spintronics as well. Because one has to take the chirality into consideration. The masculine gender of humanity excels at the way in which the polarities are mastered and applied. The feminine gender understands the very intricate, interesting ways in which the magnetic spins, chiralities, are involved, so that together, like a pair of pairs, they're able to make not only a great art of the pictures of the world that are interesting and varied and quite immensely meaningful, but to have the diamonds of consciousness that understand that there is a meaning to meaning. There's a trans structure. There's a trans anti-structure. This is a little paragraph from the ritual process. This was published in 1969, about the time that Apollo 11 went to the moon. Its little title is The Plot of the Ndembu Twin Ritual. The unifying of a pair of opposites, dominantly expressed in symbols for male-female difference, opposition, and union, constitutes what may be called the ritual plot. And then he uses the Ndembu word, ubwangu. I propose to select two important episodes in the ritual and to examine each in turn with reference to its symbolism. Ubwangu. Like most Ndembu cults of affliction, the cult association of Ubwangu is made up of persons who have themselves undergone as patients the ritual treatment characteristic of Ubwangu. If you've gone through that process yourself, you're a part of the group, not just a cult, but a group that in culture becomes a cult. The afflicting spirit is believed to be that of a deceased member of the cult. And when we come back from the break, we'll see that the affliction is usually suffered by a woman. They don't go into the spintronics of it, but we will. And the afflicting spirit that is haunting them is not their mother, not themselves, not their man, etc., etc. It is their mother's mother who is uneasy in the world beyond and needs to have a resolution from the granddaughter. Let's take a little break.